The Tom Sumner Program. Old-fashioned radio for a new generation.
Hey, even if you're out on the street or by the airport, it's okay to listen to the Tom Sumner Program. This is Steve in the Nashville office. I do it all the time.
The Tom Sumner Program. Old-fashioned radio for a new generation.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the third half of our 3-hour tour today on the Tom Sumner Program, and we're going to look back into a little bit of Flint history with a local author. Gary Flinn is back with us to talk about his book, which is coming out this week, Hidden History of Flint. Gary, welcome back to the show.
Yes, glad to be back, Tom.
Now, the book comes out exactly when?
On Monday, July 3rd.
Okay, so that's coming up this Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And then next week you have an event. You're going to do a book signing?
Yes, a book release party. It'll be Saturday, July 8th from 1 to 3 p.m. at Totem Books.
Oh, that'll be fun. And now when you do this, you are, how do we put this, self-published?
Actually, it's from a commercial publisher.
Which publisher?
It's the History Press unit of Arcadia Publishing.
Oh, okay. Nice. And did they publish your previous book?
Yes, they did.
What was the name of the first book?
The first book was Remembering Flint, Michigan, Stories from the Vehicle City.
Right. And now this one is Hidden History. Where did you find it?
Well, from many places. Just to give one example, a newsletter from the Genesee County Historical Society had a little piece about the time that all 5 Marx Brothers performed on stage, and it was the only time in Flint.
We talked about that last time you were here.
Mm-hmm.
And they usually appeared as 3, in the movies sometimes as 4,
mm-hmm.
but never 5, except that one time.
That one time, with a very young several Marx joining the other 4, Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Gummo.
Gummo. Now, see, for some reason I thought his name was Aleppo, but it's not. It's Gummo. How do you go about researching a book like this? I mean, it's one thing to see a tip and follow up on that, but when you sit down and say, how did you know that you were going to collect enough to do a book, Hidden History of Flint?
Well, after the first book came out, I was invited to contribute local history articles for Broadside, which was more or less the successor for the Uncommon Sense, of which I previously contributed local history pieces. And a good percentage of pieces I wrote for Broadside were rewritten for this book.
Oh, okay. So you had done it in a series of articles, and then this book is the collection of those.
Yes, it is.
Was there, when you were doing those articles, how did you come up with what you were going to write each time?
Well,
was it different story by story, or was there a routine that you would go through to collect information?
Basically, from things I recall in the past, things I come across in my readings, and sometimes personal experience. For example, in the back cover of my book, I came across a vintage postcard which showed a part of downtown Flint that's long gone. That's now the location of the University of Michigan Flint campus. And on that color postcard was a very colorful building that was torn down to make way for the campus, the Palace Theater.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing movies in that theater when it was still open.
Mm-hmm. And a surprising piece of trivia is both the Capitol Theater and the Palace Theater, as a first look, were both designed by architect John Everson.
And what's Everson's claim to fame?
The development of the atmospheric theater, of which the Capitol is still a fine example, where inside the theater it's like you're in an outdoor courtyard with a sky blue ceiling with stars above it.
Right. It looked almost like a planetarium inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the distinctive. Now, what era was that? What year were those built?
The Palace Theater was built in 1917. Most of the atmospheric theaters were built in the 1920s.
Okay. Was the Capitol built that early, or did it come later?
1928.
Okay, so quite a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 11 years later, which is pretty significant. So I don't want to get into something and then run out of time. Our breaks are kind of relentless.
Mm-hmm.
In the collection of stories in this book, when you, or I guess when you were writing them originally, was there one? I mean, are these all surprises, or were there some that surprised you more than others?
Probably the one that surprised me more was the Flint water crisis, which turned out to be a half-century in the making. In the 1960s, there were plans for a pipeline to provide water from Lake Huron to Flint, but a real estate profiteering scandal scuttled those plans, and that's why we wound up getting Detroit water.
Is there any connection between that project and KWA now?
Well,
because they seem very similar in many respects.
The KWA pipeline was conceived because of increasingly high water rates, where there were complaints about having high water bills. And that led the county and the city to spearhead the KWA, but the KWA won't be finished. In fact, it may be later this year before the county actually gets water from the KWA, when their own water plant is finished by Columbiaville.
And Jeff Wright, the drain commissioner and executive director of the KWA, has been on the show several times and will not admit that the problems that Flint has had has slowed up the progress of the KWA, but I have to think there's a connection there.
Well, the problem was with the city when it decided to join the KWA, but the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, which controlled the Detroit water system at that time, only gave Flint a very short notice. And that's what led to the emergency financial manager to switch Flint's water source from the Detroit water system to, unfortunately, the Flint River.
Yeah, people don't like to talk much about the Detroit Water Authority, which is now the GLWA,
Great Lakes Water Authority.
But they don't like to talk about the fact that the Detroit water that we were getting when we being Flint decided to become part of the Carinandi Water Authority, that Detroit gave us a very narrow window to either sign a long-term contract or be booted off the system, which forced them into coming up with an alternative plan. Now, lots of people, especially the people from Detroit, are saying, oh yeah, but we came back and, said we'd work with them and, change it and all that.
It's
but
11:15.
It was that trying to hold a gun to our head to make the switch long term, or to stay with Detroit long term, or be forced to make a switch, that really started this thing moving.
Yes, and the people running the water plant, which was in mothballs for several years, when they tried to get it back into operation, they were so inexperienced they didn't know how to do it right, and especially to put in those phosphates.
Right, that was critical. We need to take a short break. You're welcome to join the conversation. The number is 810-339-8255, 339-TALK. I'm talking with local author and historian Gary Flinn about his new book, Hidden History of Flint. We'll be back with more right after this.
The Tom Sumner Program. Old-fashioned
I
radio.
want to thank my mommy for loving me so much,
For taking me to the doctor when I broke my foot.
For leaving me alone when I wanted to be alone.
And now, as a grown-up, I'm thankful for being able to take care of you, my dear mom, for taking you to your therapies, for understanding that sometimes you simply want to be alone.
Roles change without us noticing. That's why AARP gives you the information to provide even better care for your loved one. visit aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP
Jill,
and the Ad
why
Council.
didn't you tell the class what you did this weekend?
Well, my dad and I went in search of some magical minnows and found a zillion of them in the stream from our lookout rock. Then my sister and I escaped from an evil slug king and went back to my super twig fort for safety. Then we told stories till it got dark, and the Big Dipper led us all the way home.
Wow. Where were you, Jill?
We went to the forest. It's not that far away.
Ask your parents to take you and your friends to the forest this week. It's closer than you think. Check out discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad
For
Council.
the best in recovery radio, WFOV 92.1 LP FM Flint.
Es importante prepararse por adelantado para situaciones de emergencias, como tormentas. Cuando azotó, teníamos un punto de encuentro donde reunirnos.
Estábamos separados.
La experiencia fue bastante sencilla.
Traumática.
El consejo que les doy a otras mamás es que sigan su plan.
No ignoren este mensaje.
Algunos padres planifican por adelantado, otros no. Asegúrese que su familia tenga un punto de reunión para encontrarse en casos de emergencia. Visite listo.gov. Este es un mensaje de Ready Iowa.
Es importante prepararse por adelantado para situaciones de emergencias, como tormentas. Cuando azotó, teníamos un punto de encuentro donde reunirnos.
Estábamos separados.
La experiencia fue bastante sencilla.
Traumática.
El consejo que les doy a otras mamás es que sigan su plan.
No ignoren este mensaje.
Algunos padres planifican por adelantado, otros no. Asegúrese que su familia tenga un punto de reunión para encontrarse en casos de emergencia. Visite listo.gov y comience a desarrollar su plan. Este es un mensaje.
¿Cómo puedo ayudar a mi hija con su lectura?
Buscando ayuda sobre arquitectura húngara.
No, ¿cómo puedo ayudar a mi hija con su lectura?
Ejercicios para mejorar la postura.
No, Sara es brillante, pero cuando lee no puede pronunciar las palabras.
Comida para cabras. ¿Le gustaría comprar?
¿Ves? No, ya.
Déjame intentar. Mi hija se confunde con los detalles que son importantes en una historia.
Bien, buscando información sobre restaurante Chistorra. Hay 3 restaurantes en un radio de 5 millas.
¿Por qué no me entiendes?
Espere, estaba tratando de mostrarles lo que Sara siente todos los días. Es frustrante, ¿verdad? Enviando a understood.org.
Esto es lo que 1 de cada 5 chicos con dificultades de aprendizaje y de atención puede sentir. Explore understood.org, un recurso gratuito en línea sobre dificultades de aprendizaje y de atención diseñado para ayudar a su hijo a salir adelante. Understood.org, porque entender es todo.
Presentado por understood.org y el Ad Council.
Hi, my name is Anthony. My life was like a roller coaster. I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. Of course, I tried to keep it secret from everybody else, but pretty much everybody else knew. I lost everything. Worst part about it was I wasn't treating my baby girl right. Wasn't spending enough time being her dad. That's the thing I wanted to be the most in the whole world, was to be a good dad. And so I called Odyssey House. In months of self-searching and help from Odyssey House, I'm getting myself together and getting back on the right track.
The Tom Sumner Program. Old-fashioned radio for a new generation.
This is Cindy Gamrat, and you're listening to the Tom Sumner Program.
Stream us live weekdays at 9 Eastern at TomSumnerProgram.com. Made possible by listeners like you.
The Tom Sumner Program. Old-fashioned radio for a new generation.
And welcome back, everybody, as we continue our conversation with author-historian from Flint, Gary Flinn, talking about his newest book, Hidden History of Flint, which comes out next Monday. He will be doing a book signing at Totem Books. Is that Thursday night?
Saturday.
Saturday night.
Saturday afternoon, 1 to 3, over at Totem Books, across from White Horse on West Court Street.
And you were telling me that you were going to be signing the books with Huntington Bank pens.
Exactly. It's been a very successful advertising method for Huntington, giving away thousands and thousands and thousands of pens over the years, and they continue to do so.
And of course, you put a chapter in the book so you could get a whole bunch of pens. No, I'm kidding. But there is a chapter in the book, Hidden History of Flint, about Huntington Bank and the acquisitions that led up to it. And it's very funny what you did with the title, and reminded me of a couple other things we'll get to in a minute. But essentially what you did was you said the history of, and then you listed all of the bank names that company had held until it was finally purchased by Huntington Bank. And you have lines drawn through them, as if they've been edited to bring it up to date. Pretty fun way to put that timeline right into the title.
Yes, Huntington's local operations began during the depths of the Great Depression. I think it was 1934 that the National Bank of Flint was founded to free up the impounded assets of two failed banks. They were Union Industrial Bank, which, by the way, has a chapter in this book about a scandal that occurred when some Union Industrial Bank employees and officers decided to, quote, invest, unquote, bank funds in the stock market, which, well, when the stock market crash took place, the losses could no longer be hidden, and the head of the bank, Charles Stewart Mott, of course, fired them. But this is a good story. Of course, you know how Mr. Mott was such a benefactor to the people of Flint.
Sure.
After the losses were estimated, Mr. Mott went to Detroit and withdrew the exact amount of the losses from his private bank account in Detroit, and then, with armored cars in tow, came to the Union Industrial Bank to recoup the funds. And so that made Charles Stewart Mott a hero at that time.
Oh, so people literally just came to the bank and were given the money that had been taken from them by these employees.
Well, that basically recouped the lost assets for that bank.
Oh, okay. So people's deposits were then safeguarded because the money had been replaced by Mott personally.
Yes.
He personally guaranteed those assets.
Unfortunately, that did not prevent that bank, following the 1933 bank holiday, from reopening. So that, along with the First National Bank of Flint, which was located where First Priest Lofts is now, the opposite intersection of where the Union Industrial Bank headquarters, now the Mott Foundation building, is.
Mm-hmm.
So when the new bank was organized, it was located in the former Union Industrial branch, headquarters, at the corner of Saginaw and First Street. So until Bank of America closed its downtown branch, it served as the location for the First National Bank of Flint and its successor banks, which were Michigan National Bank, then there was Standard Federal Bank, then there was LaSalle Bank, and then Bank of America. I understand that now the Flint Genesee Chambers of Commerce is based in the former bank space in the Mott Foundation building.
Mm-hmm. And there's no longer a bank in that building?
No, no longer. But Huntington, having taken over First Merit Bank, the former Citizens Bank, is now located below the landmark weather ball, of which I'm still waiting for the letters to be replaced with, say, letters that say HB instead of FM, which stands for First Merit, but some people think, okay, let's make it stand for Flint, Michigan.
Right. And of course, the letters that were taken down, CB for Citizens Bank, are those housed at Sloan now? I thought I heard what happened. There was an article about what happened to those letters, and I can't recall what the final disposition was.
If I recall, I think they were scrapped.
Really? I know there were people lobbying to have them salvaged somehow, but
of course those letters were very, very big.
Yeah, they were pretty good size. But interesting that First Merit kept the weather ball, because there was talk that they weren't going to.
But they announced that they were keeping the weather ball and refacing with new letters. And Huntington said they would keep the weather ball. In fact, when they did a large coffee table book, which I was able to borrow from the Ballinger Highway branch of Huntington, the section about First Merit Bank and Citizens Bank showed a photo of the weather ball with the original CB letters. And of course, I mentioned that Huntington book in the list of acknowledgments and at the end of the book.
Sure. I mentioned about this chapter with Huntington Bank and the different incarnations of banks leading up to Huntington Bank. And it reminded me of a piece Paul Rosicki did recently within the last couple of years, about the succession of mayors and emergency managers in a fairly short period of time. There were this long list of who had served as mayor or the leader of Flint, including emergency managers. And so there's like 10 or 12 names in the space of about 8 years or something. It's kind of a fun way to look at things timeline wise. But what were some of the other? We got a chance to poke at one of the things that surprised you in your research that went into the series of articles that you wrote that became a collection now known as Hidden History of Flint. But in those historical pieces, what were some of the other surprises for you?
Well, one surprise, I don't know if I may have mentioned it previously, was about a real estate profiteering scandal. Claude Darby, a real estate agent, Claude Darby Sr., I should say, he was in charge of procuring land for a planned pipeline from Lake Huron to Flint in the 1960s.
Right.
However, what happened was he bought the land in Worth Township in Sanilac County along Lake Huron, but before he became the land agent for the city, he had sold that piece of property to Samuel Katzman, who then resold the property at a profit back to Darby for use for the intake for the planned city pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
However, once this impropriety was revealed, Mr. Darby had to forfeit the profit he made from that sale. He also was given immunity from prosecution to testify against Mr. Katzman. However, the visiting judge ruled, well, he cleared Katzman of any charges, giving the whole sad episode, blaming it on Mr. Darby for his greed.
I'll be darned. Now, just without spoiling the book, of course, all this stuff has been published before. But what are some of the other stories that are included in the book? Some of the other chapters?
Well, there's quite a few others. For example, back when I was writing for the Uncommon Sense, I was asked to do research about Flint's founder, Jacob Smith.
Uh-huh.
And the piece was called Flint, an Indian reservation. That's the piece I wrote.
It's 11:30.
But it was used in an article that was that Bob Merritt, who was a major contributor to Broadside, wrote for the Uncommon Sense in the June 2006 issue, which he called "This Land is My Land." And there was speculation that could Flint be an Indian reservation? In the Treaty of 1819, if I recall, several plots of land along the Flint River were assigned to people under their Chippewa names. However, a good chunk of them, about half of them, were given to Jacob Smith's children under their Chippewa names.
The Smith children had Chippewa names?
Yes, they were given Chippewa names by the Chippewa Nation. They gave Jacob Smith himself
as an honorarium, kind of just an honorary thing, or why would they be given Chippewa names?
I guess because the Chippewa people adopted the Smith and his family.
Okay.
Jacob Smith, if you go to his grave at Glenwood Cemetery,
right,
on the back of that marker, gives his Chippewa name of Wabisons.
Okay.
Which I think meant young swan.
Okay. And for people who don't know, Jacob Smith is, according to record, the first white settler in Flint.
Yes, he was.
And he had a little trading post or something along the Flint River about where Grand Traverse is, or Grand Traverse is connected in some way to the name of that.
Roughly, it was located, if I remember right, on Lion Street. There's an historic marker along Lion Street which shows the location of Jacob Smith's old trading post.
And now, what would that have been like? There was the trading post. Yeah. Would he have lived on that property? How did it? Once he began to have children and Flint began to grow as a community, how did that change and alter going forward? When
he had a family, he had his family in Detroit while he was in Flint. I do include in that Jacob Smith chapter a very primitive drawing of, say, Jacob Smith with his wife and children visiting. And this was taken from a Flint Board of Education textbook called Tales of Early Flint. Mm-hmm. At the Flint Public Library, they got a very nice high-resolution scanner that you can take physical pages and scan them, and then plug in a flash drive or thumb drive into the scanner and capture the images. So I've done that quite a few times for the illustrations in my new book.
Oh, okay. And now, when you say that he had his family in Detroit, how did that work? Because he certainly didn't commute.
Well, it was obviously.
What is the timeline like for that, Gary? I mean, he had this trading post. How long was the trading post, and where did he live, and when did his family evolve, and where did they live?
Well, he built his cabin around 1811. Of course, Flint and Detroit were connected by the Saginaw Trail, which was an Indian trail which evolved into Saginaw Street, Dixie Highway, and Woodward Avenue. And after his wife died, I forget when, he moved permanently to his Flint River cabin in 1819. He died in 1825.
Okay, so he had his kids before starting this trading post, mm-hmm. and he was in Detroit. What brought him up this way?
Just
adventuring, and just exploring, and then thought this would be a great spot,
and making some money trading off the natives.
And trading what? Furs and
furs and basically furs, and trading them for various implements and blankets and so on.
Right.
In fact, I speculated that he or Chief Naomi who was the Chippewa chief at that time, they may have worn capotes like the one I described in my book.
And that was a conversation we had off the air. The capote is what?
The capote is a wool blanket which was traded with the native peoples in the cold climates, originally by the Hudson's Bay Company, which is still a leading department store chain in Canada, but is North America's oldest retailer.
And they and then you said French settlers were the ones who initially came up with the idea to sew these blankets into coats, basically.
Yes, and they had a hood, capote being a French word meaning hood. And the native peoples over there...
The original hoodie.
Yeah, the original hoodie, yes.
Yeah.
And the native peoples adopted the capote for their own purposes. So the wool blankets, of which they're still being sold by the Hudson's Bay Company, by the way, they were used not just as sleeping blankets, but they could also be worn like say, togas. And those were used before they were sewn into coats.
And then once the French started sewing these into coats, the indigenous people imitated that and started developing coats themselves. They would have initially worn them without fashioning them into coats or Western style clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stuff. Now, the about how many chapters are in the book, Gary?
There are 35 chapters in this book.
And each one of those represents a piece or a story you did, or is there some new stuff that you wrote for the book exclusively?
Some chapters, I did contribute articles to the Flint Journal and their now defunct UR magazine, which was a monthly publication the Journal published.
Mm-hmm.
After the cutbacks, which led to the Flint Journal ceasing being a daily publication, they stopped utilizing my services. So that was when Broadside decided they would like me to contribute articles.
Right.
Articles that I can update and rewrite, so I don't have to deal with copyright issues, because the old pieces I wrote for the Flint Journal and UR magazine were still under their copyright. Of course, I couldn't touch anything that could be updated, but anything I could rewrite and update, I could do that. And that's what I do with a few of my chapters, like that Huntington National Bank piece, which was written for UR magazine when what was LaSalle Bank switched to being Bank America.
Oh, okay.
And a few other things. I was asked to write a piece on early theater and Shakespeare in Flint, which talked about Flint's earliest theaters, including Flint's first theater, which was located inside Fenton Hall, which was located at the corner of Saginaw and Kersley Street, where the flat lot is now. For a long time, the Kresge store was located at that site.
Was that pre-movies?
Pre-movies, yes.
So this was a small theater that would have been home to, I don't know, community theater, traveling theater, vaudeville, perhaps.
Yes, and it was an upstairs theater, but it turned out to be inadequate to do large productions. So a theater which could stage large productions was built, where the old Flint Journal building now stands, which became the Michigan State University Med School. It was first called the Music Hall. Then, after Orrin Stone bought it, became Stone's Opera House, before W.S. Butterfield leased it, and it became the Majestic Theater, before it was torn down to make way for the Flint Journal building. It was that theater, along with the first vaudeville theater in Flint, the Bijou, which later became the Garden Theater. It was at those two theaters that the Marx Brothers performed, and it was at the Majestic Theater where all five Marx Brothers performed, for was believed to be the only time in Flint.
Right. When now during the last 3 years, the Flint water crisis, there has been a great many celebrities that have come to Flint or lent their name to causes on Flint's behalf. But what are some examples from your book of, aside from the Marx Brothers, of celebrity connections with Flint?
Of course, several celebrities did help out. Of course, the water crisis became a major campaign issue last year. But I devote more of my time in the book to my own experience living on Flint's west side and having to deal with the water crisis personally. In fact, during that Flushing...
we talked about that a little bit the last time you were here, Gary, and in light of recent developments, what's the status at your place? How is your water testing, and are your bills current? You don't have to worry about a lien being placed on your house. You're not defiantly not paying for water you can't use, etc.
Well, I am current. However, when they've been estimating the water bills, and well, I just had my water meter replaced because the estimate I got turned out to be much higher than what I usually use. So on my book's Facebook page, and I think on one of those Flint Water Crisis Facebook page, I show a picture of the bill with my old water meter reading, took a picture of both, and shared that. Of course, I clamored with the City Water Department, and they gave me a replacement meter. Hopefully the next bill will reflect the changes. I only paid the amount of the bill I usually pay, and not the excessive amount, which I thought was excessive.
Right.
But I continue to pay the bill, just pay what I've been paying, usually, just 1 unit. That's how much I usually consume each month. My own experience with the water, I had, during the flushing campaign, May of last year, I wound up with a very, very high lead reading for my kitchen faucet. So I clamored for help and got help August of last year, where I got a free replacement kitchen faucet and a 3M under the sink filter, courtesy of the state, United Way, and the 3M company.
Right.
The last test was low at 2 parts per billion from the kitchen faucet. I'm still using a faucet filter in the bathroom, so I am still using the faucet filter, and I replace the under the sink filter in the kitchen annually. I get that free.
The book is Hidden History of Flint, written by Gary Flinn, and Gary, the book comes out Monday, and not this Saturday, but a week from Saturday. On what is the date?
Saturday, July 8th.
July 8th. Gary will be at Totem Books with books to sign with Huntington Bank pens and
here's a copy.
Oh man, this is great.
Already signed with a Huntington pen.
Look at that. Look at that. Hidden History of Flint, courtesy of Gary Flynn. Gary, thanks so much for being here and sharing these stories with us.
Thank you,
It's
Tom.
always a pleasure. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back to wrap up today's edition of the Tom Sumner program. For those of you listening on 92.1 FM, we'll break away and let them squeeze a few words in edgewise. For those of you staying with us on the website, TomSumnerProgram.com, we have a break as well. We'll
The
be
Tom
right back.
Sumner Program. Old-fashioned radio for a new generation.